Holy shit, this season has been insane. Absolutely insane. Chris and Sam are locked into the 1 and 2 seed of the playoffs, certainly. But in the final week of the regular season, we legitimately now have 6 of us fighting for the last 2 playoff spots. This is largely in part because the bottom 5 teams in the standings going into last week all won our matchups, including Scott getting his first win since week 2 against Chris, who, by the way, is still having the second best scoring year of all time in league history. And Scott edged him out by less than a point. I mean, it doesn't help Scott escape the Sacco, and frankly, we don't really count moral victories in this league, but damn it, that had to be at least like a small sigh of relief for Scott finally remembering what a win can feel like. Also, weirdly, we had 5 teams last week score within a 6-point range of each other, which has only happened one other time this whole year, and it was literally the week before. It's like the fantasy gods know that this playoff race is coming down to the wire and are like, oh, you want things to be close? Everyone scores the same in back-to-back weeks. Boom, suck on that. Even better, that multiple teams had multiple players scoring until literally the final plays of the game on Monday night as Drake May knelt the clock out. The Patriots got a sack right at the end of the game. The scriptwriters were in their bag for that one. The thing that makes all this even crazier is that only 2 of those 6 playoff hopeful teams play each other this week, meaning that there's legitimately a world in which 5 of the 6 playoff contenders all win our matchups, and then it comes down to where everyone ranks in scoring this week. Speaking of which, as a reminder, the tiebreaker in the unlikely event of a tie ranking-wise is total points for, and 4 teams right now are less than 1 point per game away from each other. So just like camping, this final week is going to be intense. Notably, this is the lowest projected we've been as a league all year. I know projections don't matter, but it is still interesting. We got starting quarterbacks are injured. Weather is starting to really factor in some locations. Backfields are largely committees at this point. Good players are banged up, and there are some brutal matchups for the best fantasy assets. And also, Christian McCaffrey is on a bye. So I'm guessing that several matchups are going to be pretty low scoring overall, except probably Sam against Jason. Furthermore, 4 out of the 5 matchups have at least one player on Monday Night Football. All 5 will have it if Chris can nut up and play the Eagles defense. So there's a really good chance for some last-minute drama. I know some of y'all don't give a shit about rivalry week, but any way you look at it, this is shaping up to be the greatest week 14 in league history. Now let's talk about the power rankings. At number 10, in the same spot as last week, is Scott. Despite his heroic win over Chris last week, it was the first time that Scott's team broke 100 points since week 7. This is still a bad team, and even though he'll likely get Jane Daniels back, Scott is locked into the Sacco. Tough break, homie. At number 9, down 2 spots from last week, is me. How the fuck is this team in 3rd place? It didn't look great most of the season, even in that weird 4-game win streak that I had a while ago. And then I sold Derrick Henry and Jamar Chase, by far the best 2 players on my roster. And yet this team has somehow limped its way into playoff contention with not one single good wide receiver on the roster, 0 top 10 running backs, a rookie tight end who has a quarterback with a broken hand, and a kicker who looks like he isn't allowed within 500 feet of a school. This team sucks, and I am certain that Chris and Sam are absolutely frothing at the mouth at the possibility of me making the playoffs, since that would basically guarantee them a first-round bye for whichever of them gets to play me. At number 8, up 1 spot from last week, is Dan. This hasn't really felt like a typical Dan year. You know, most years after the draft, I don't like Dan's team. I think a lot of people have shared that same sentiment. But then it always turns out that he'd found a couple diamonds in the rough or took chances on players after a down year and then ends up making the playoffs with ease. This year, again, I didn't like his team, but then the resurgence never came. This team has stayed down, especially after selling CeeDee Lamb and Trey McBride, your 2 best players by a country mile. This team probably deserves to be in the Sacco at this point. At number 7, up 1 spot from last week, is Grant. Since he returned in week 7, Rashee Rice has averaged 14.8 points per game. That is tied for first in fantasy football with none other than Jackson Smith and Jigba. Rice, Bijan, Olave, and the Seahawks defense have provided Grant with a quietly solid floor and are helping him score over 100 in 9 out of 13 games this year. All he needs is the typical, 17 from his quarterback and like 6 to 8 points from everyone else, and Grant could put up yet another respectable week as he has most of the year. At number 6, in the same spot as last week, is Kevin. Kevin's averaging almost 120 points a game over the last 5 weeks. And while he has some incredible matchups this week, I think this is where the magic might end. Justin Jefferson has basically the equivalent of like a moldy loaf of bread throwing him the ball. Kamara probably isn't going to play this week. Bo Nix and Juwan Johnson are, well, themselves. Not to mention Kevin is missing Travion Henderson and George fucking Kittle. This team could certainly score points if a couple things fall the right way, but if Achane and Judkins don't combine for like 40, I don't think we'll be seeing 120 again this week. At number 5, in the same spot as last week, is Tim. I feel slightly less confident in this team lately. Since Tim's 150-point explosion in Week 9, he's averaging 103.6 points a game, 4th worst in the league over that span. Now, granted, aside from Rico Dowdle being on a bye, Tim's squad is finally looking healthy and ready to go. And if he wins, he's most likely in the playoffs. Acquiring Lamb and McBride has filled out this roster nicely and should give Tim at least a fighting chance against anyone in the postseason, should he get there. At number 4, in the same spot as last week, is Patrick. Basically everything that could have gone wrong last week went wrong. Jalen Hurts turned the ball over twice, didn't get any rushing production. Josh Jacobs limped off the field several times, including when the Packers got inside the 5-yard line. Zay Flowers got called for the softest OPI of all time on what would have been a long touchdown. JSN was the victim of a terrible game script and scored a season-low 23 yards. And, of course, Patrick benched Jameson Williams, and he hung nearly 20 points on the Packers out of nowhere. Hard to believe that all of that happens again, meaning that I still believe that Patrick's team is one of the 4 best in the league. Making the playoffs, however, is another story that we'll discuss later. At number 3, same spot as last week, is Jason. How the shit is my horrible team 1.2 points ahead of Jason in the standings? Jason has 3 top 10 running backs, 2 top 10 wide receivers, the number 5 tight end, and Joe motherfucking Burrow. He's also scored in the bottom half of the league 8 times in 13 weeks. The definition of a boom-bust team. It's just been really weird that all of his players go off or post a dud at the exact same time, and it's been the case almost the entire year. That, coupled with a few questionable lineup decisions, keeps what I believe to be a borderline elite team struggling to make the playoffs. Jason has alternated between 3rd and 7th in scoring for 5 weeks straight somehow. So if that pattern continues, it won't, he'll beat Sam this week, gain 1.8 in the standings, and likely make the playoffs. We'll see. At number 2, down 1 spot from last week, is Chris. No McCaffrey this week, but don't worry. Chris has backup Bears running back Kyle Monangai and Adonai Mitchell to make up those lost points. I don't understand how Chris continues to get production out of the weirdest players, but hey, that's the mark of a good fantasy manager. If it happens once or twice, yeah, it's luck, but Chris has been pulling this shit all season. We'll see if his hot streak continues into the playoffs, but with Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, it actually might not matter what his wide receivers do. And at number 1, up 1 spot from last week, is Sam. Listen, Stafford is gunning for MVP. James Cook has surpassed 100 yards in 9 of his 12 games and has scored 9 touchdowns. Barkley has a crazy easy schedule in the playoffs. Bowers might actually get competent play calling after Chip Kelly's firing. The Texans' defense is the best in the NFL and has an insanely easy playoff schedule. Oh, and not to mention, Sam has the best wide receivers in the league by far, and that's even if Amon-Ra St. Brown doesn't play this week. This team is poised to contend for a ship. No doubt about it. And now the upcoming matchups. Start with Grant against me. This one could be close, but I think, frankly, Grant has a really good shot at ruining my playoff hopes. It helps that even though it's against the Texans' elite defense, Mahomes is fighting for the Chiefs to stay playoff relevant. Really, though, I need Jags, Colts, and Packers, Bears to turn into absolute barn burners, except for Romeo Dobbs, or I'm in pretty deep shit. Dan against Scott is next. This, I think, is an incredibly even matchup, as are, well, several others. But this was one that made me really consider making all of these pick'ems instead of having lines this week. Scott has a chance to drag Dan into the Sacco with him, which I think would be ideal for Scott at this point. Both teams have great matchups this week, so we'll see what happens. Chris against Kevin is next. Kevin, by the way, has been a top 4 scorer for 5 weeks in a row and has gone 4-1 over that span and is now making a legit case for a playoff berth. He has an extremely tough matchup against his older brother, but a win from Kevin and 2 losses between Jason, Tim, and me would likely get him in. That's crazy. Patrick against Tim is next. Fuck, man, this one's going to be good, dude. I'm so excited to watch this matchup. If Tim wins, he's basically almost certainly in. If Patrick wins, he's going to need a lot of help, but it's definitely not impossible. Sam against Jason, though, is the matchup of the week. The highest projected matchup by far. Plus, Jason is likely in with a win and then needs either a loss from Tim or me. Plus, I mean, come on. This is like the rivalry of the league. It dates back like 20 years now. So Sam has a chance to knock Jason out in spite of Jason being the 3rd best scorer of the regular season, while Jason, however, could win and then potentially get to face Sam in the championship. This week is going to be absolute cinema. Anyway, guys, that'll do it for this week's recap. Good luck to everyone except Grant, and go fuck yourselves.